Cross-border transactions, part 2, with Federico Vasoli and Domenic Pini. That is our topic for today. Welcome to the Lawyers and Mediators International show and podcast, where we discuss law and conflict resolution topics to educate both professionals and everyday people. Catch regular episodes on YouTube and anywhere you get your podcasts. Just remember, nothing in these episodes constitutes legal advice, so be sure to talk to a lawyer, as cases are fact-dependent. Hey everyone, this is Mac Pierre-Louis, attorney, mediator, arbitrator, working for Florida and Texas. Welcome back to the podcast, lmipodcast.com. And we're back here with two guests, Federico Vasoli and Domenic Pini of International Jurists. That's internationaljurist.com. Be sure to screen share the website, internationaljurist.com. And so we're here today to continue a conversation on cross-border transactions. Last week it was just with Federico, but this week we have Domenic back to continue the conversation on the business world and international law, and focusing on the good, bad, and ugly when it comes to cross-border disputes, cross-border transactions. All right, gentlemen, how are you guys today?
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you, Mac.
Good.
It's great to be back.
Yes, sirs. Okay, so guys, let's recap a little bit. So a couple weeks ago, we did the video, of course, called Part 1 on cross-border transactions. And people are encouraged to go back to the channel and check out the first video if they're interested. And in that video, we defined cross-border transactions and we kind of delved into different examples. But now we're going to continue to go a little bit more in depth. And I'd like to just recap that on internationaljurist.com, when folks go here, they'll be able to find different lawyers who deal with international disputes, international conflicts, and international business transactions. When I click on some of these countries, of course, Pini Franco LP, that's you, Domenic, and the UK, you're listed on there. And Singapore, I see DMTV Global, that's you, Federico. So this is just a good resource for people to go find different attorneys who might not be local, might not be domestic, but can help them even though they're foreign. And so this is a good time to then talk about trust. As I asked you guys before we started recording, when you are a foreigner trying to do business in another country and you need an attorney, you need somebody to help you navigate, the local laws, the local jurisdictional rules. A lot of times you don't know if you don't know who to trust. You don't know if the attorney you're reaching out to is going to be reputable. You can't touch them. You typically cannot just get on an airplane and go visit with them and do a consultation. And a lot of times you're stuck to the telephone or Zoom. So how do you, for somebody, who's a business person, who's a foreigner, but who wants to do business on the ground in another country, how do you make sure that you can trust the lawyer who you're reaching out to, who can help you know those rules? Can you guys speak to the issue of trust and how you guys in your own lives, address to make sure you can give people confidence that they're reaching out to somebody that will not just be a shyster and, take their money?
Federico.
Well, in our case, normally it has to do with our expertise and experience in the foreign jurisdictions where we operate. So first of all, I don't really see that much of a difference when it comes to domestic jurisdictions. So when I used to work in Italy, I already faced the issue of trust with clients. In a jurisdiction like Italy with 200,000, 250,000 lawyers, why would clients trust me instead of other lawyers? The same applies abroad. In our case, most of our clients abroad in Vietnam and Singapore come through referrals given by by previous clients or existing clients, as well as institutions. So what happens is that typically a foreign client, that is a non-Vietnamese or non-Singaporean client, would seek legal advice and would contact embassies, consulates, chambers of commerce, etc., and would say, I have this business issue to solve in that jurisdiction. Could you recommend somebody? And we are recommended. So the embassy, consulate, chamber of commerce, whatever, they would say, yes, this is a list of trusted lawyers that we have vetted, and we recommend this and this and this name. So the potential client then would call us or would send us an email, and we would take it from there. So there is already an intermediation, if you want, whereby there is an element of trust. The other aspect, especially in Vietnam, is the fact that we speak other languages on top of Vietnamese. Even though we have to praise the Vietnamese for their command of the English language, it is true that not all lawyers, as good as they can be in Vietnam, speak good English. So the fact that we do, and on top of English, we speak Italian and other languages, that helps a lot, especially in translating the local customs into not really the legal understanding of clients, but it is very useful for us to be able to translate, and for the clients, of course, to understand what the local mentality is like. That helps a lot. So this is how we deal with this issue. I believe that Domenic has something else to add on that.
Yeah, I'd say, this is a multi-layered question, because if you have a brand which is recognized throughout the world, people will go to the brand because it is recognized throughout the world. It has big insurance cover. So, when you're talking about the Magic Circle firms or the big law firms in the States or in Italy, they have a brand, and people will be attracted to them where they have large transactions because they're simply a brand. And then you have the other layer, which is, of course, the small to medium-sized firms, and that is a different ballgame because they may not have a brand, and therefore people will go to these firms based upon recommendations, and usually those recommendations come from other clients that those firms have served, and so it's a virtue spiral, if I say. It's sort of, if you are good at what you do, other clients will tell other clients. I mean, I worked for a very large shoe manufacturer that was Italian, and as a consequence of opening a couple of their shops in London, then another luxury company came to us in the sunglass range, and we then became involved in their project for the United Kingdom. So it's sort of virtue spiral, providing you provide a good service, of course, because if you don't, then you won't get them back. But I should also say that there are two other levels to this. The other level is that where you get existing clients that come to you and say, I need someone to operate for me in a jurisdiction, I don't know, Panama or the States. Do you know anybody? And that's where you have to be, you have to be upfront and say, I don't know anybody, or yes, I do. I've worked with this person before, and he's, top rate, and I would recommend you go to him. From the IJ point of view, all the people that come to IJ, we used to have what is known as a site inspection. So we used to go to their offices and find out what their offices were like, who they employed, so that we were able to understand whether they would be a good fit for us. Along came COVID, and that no longer was possible. So then we did virtual site inspections. And also, as I mentioned before, when we were talking about what is the purpose of a lawyer's network, you get to meet these people personally. So you know their characters and their personalities, and you know how they operate and whether they're a good fit for your type of client. I should say, in total transparency, the fact that me and Federico are members of international jurists, it doesn't necessarily mean to say that all our referrals are within this jurisdiction, because some of the members may not have the requisite skill set to deal with the type of work. So if you've got a intellectual property issue in, let's say, Romania, or I don't know, you may want to look for someone in that area, which doesn't necessarily mean to say it will be within IJ. So I think, there are different levels of reply to the question of trust, but essentially it's to do with the quality of the service and whether the client is happy. Not all clients, are easy to please, but on the whole, if you do a good job, people will come back to you and other people will come back to you.
Yeah, that's the virtue spiral. I like
Yeah.
that. And so it's a form of vetting, because ultimately referrals are a form of vetting, right? It builds trust. And that's why you guys set it up. So Federico, anything else to add on that?
Well, something that Domenic said when we were offline, which is longevity. That's very important. You cannot just invent yourself by saying, hey, I'm a top lawyer. You may be in that jurisdiction, but it doesn't convey trust to potential clients. If you're established in a certain jurisdiction for many years, then that helps, that adds to the level of trust that you convey to potential clients.
But I should add something to that, which is you can't rest on your laurels. You're only as good as your last client. So, if you think that, because you've done a great job for client A, that, that's enough, that's not going to work. Every single new engagement comes along has to have your full 100% dedication and attention in order for them to feel that you're on top of the game. Part of the problem with the very large firms, and quite recently we got an engagement from a large accountancy firm, which surprised me. But the reason why they did that was because they had immediate access to the partner involved for the transaction. Whereas if had they outsourced it to a major large law firm, due to costs, they would have been dealing with different layers of assistance, and it would have spun between 3 or 4 people. So sometimes you get engagements which are sculptured or created where the client wants an immediate attention and doesn't, and therefore the best way of doing that is to go to the medium-sized law firms that prize them as being very important. Whereas if you're dealing with a small cap acquisition, 5 million, 6, 7 million, this is peanuts for the large firms, but for the small to medium size firms, this is very important work.
Got it. So let's segue now to some other cross-border dispute issues. So let's talk about investments. I should say business issues. So Federico, what is it like to set up a business cross-border? And when you answer this, speak to us from what perspective you're speaking, because you may have to, I guess, answer the question 2 different ways, right? It depends on, are you the person who's in the country who has the foreigner coming in, or are you the foreigner going in? So what is it like to invest into a foreign business?
Well, in either case, it is not an easy exercise, especially if the jurisdiction is outside of treaties or unions. So let's start with the basics. There can be, and there are indeed, free trade agreements between jurisdictions that include not just rules about trade, but also about investments. And if you are within an area, a free trade area, such as the European Union, or jurisdictions with which another jurisdiction has a free trade agreement, that makes life much easier. Now, let's assume that this is not the case, such as the countries that I sometimes operate in, and that is complicated. So essentially, you have to check what the rules of the game are, check the definitions, and check what type of investments are allowed or not. I'll give you the simple example of Vietnam. In Vietnam, there is essentially a list of industries. So business lines are divided into what is favored meaning generally that there are tax breaks for either sectors, business industries that are considered strategic for the country, for its development, or in areas that are deprived. Number two is industries that are so-called conditioned, meaning that foreigners can invest in those industries upon meeting certain conditions. For instance, having a local shareholder, for instance, not owning more than X% of the share capital, for instance, having a certain capitalization, for instance, obtaining certain sub-licenses, etc. Number three is industries where foreigners cannot operate. Number four is residual, and it means you can invest freely according to the rules of the game. So whatever the type of business you do, you have to check first that that industry falls into any of these four categories that I've just mentioned. And then based on the category that it falls into, then you know what rules apply to that business. The other way around is probably simpler. That is, it is probably simpler in terms of legalities for, let's say, a Vietnamese to invest in the European Union. But again, there are a number of limitations. So I would say that it is reciprocal, whether you are the foreigner investing elsewhere or whether you're the recipient of the investor. It looks quite similar, but these are the basics that I would give. So what type of business you're doing, and then based on that, what licenses you need, what permits, what capitalization, do you need a local shareholder, et cetera, et cetera.
Got it. Domenic, do you want to add anything about
investments?
Well,
I'm in a completely different ballgame because although there are restrictions in respect of inward investment into the UK in terms of armaments or nuclear power, security interests, they're very limited, and therefore it's very much an open possibility that you can create joint ventures concerning almost every single type of trade that you want in this country, except for those restricted areas which are heavily regulated, gas and electricity supplies, for instance, nuclear power, armaments, anything which is of vital structural national interest will have the necessity of having a consent from the Secretary of State for that particular sector. But other than that, it's pretty much free range. It's a bit like the States, I would have thought.
Okay. Let's talk about another issue that comes up cross-border. So before the conversation, started being recorded, we were just having a small chat about different examples you guys have seen, and you said a lot of interesting things from your experience, Domenic. When joint ventures go badly in the cross-border world, how badly do you mean? Like, how badly can it go? Again, this all goes back to reasons why people need to find good attorneys, on international jurists, for example, so that they don't get themselves into a trap. And sometimes I use the phrase good, bad, and ugly. And so I'd kind of like to know, maybe an example, or you don't have to give an example, I'm sure, because of confidentiality. But if you could just explain, this is to you too, Federico, how badly can it get if people go with somebody who might not know completely what they're doing?
Is the question for me or for Domenic?
Domenic.
Oh, right. Okay. The classic example of problems arises where you have friends. We had a case recently where two friends from many years decided to invest in the opening of chocolate orientated shops in central London. So there were lots of items like hot chocolate and all the rest of it. But when that relationship, which was not documented, fell apart, then you had issues which arose. And these issues are often to do with who has, what is the structure. And in this particular case, the structure was that there was only a sole director of the UK companies that were administrating these chocolate shops. And of course, the other friend, who was a shareholder, had no direct control over how these shops were being managed. And therefore, when the relationship split apart due to differences, the management continued on its path under one of the shareholders, who was also a director, and that created all sorts of problems. So the essential thing is to have, documentation which sets out very clearly what the joint venture or what the relationship is all about. But even when you have that, and I recently had a case where a client set up a UK company which had the patents for monitoring the health of sports people, so that the trainers had the ability to assess the physical state of their football players. Even when we had an agreement in place with the investor and with the originator of the idea, that agreement wasn't complied with, then you have a whole series of problems, because these agreements are based upon meeting milestones, like, you have to, by a certain date, acquire the balance of the shares. And if you don't acquire the balance of the shares, then you don't have access to this, that, and the other. So the whole of these structures are based upon inward investment, even when they are properly documented. And I hope I documented it well. I think I did. Even if there's non-compliance, then a whole series of issues arise, which cause the whole of the venture to grind to a halt. And then, unfortunately, you have to resort to some sort of dispute resolution issues. So yes, I think what I'm trying to say is that when clients come together from different jurisdictions, they have to have a very clear purpose, and that purpose has to be properly documented, and they have to have, as it were, a common vision, because often the vision, which is, if it's not a common vision as to what they want to do, the whole thing will begin to dissolve.
Yeah, Federico, do you want to add to
yes,
what are some ways it can go bad?
Very briefly, it can go bad in various ways, but things that come to mind immediately are two. One is the enforceability of judgments. So people do business and things go sour, they go to court, and then what do you do with a foreign judgment in a country that does not recognize and enforce that judgment? It is very typical with Vietnam. I have clients from Italy that say, I want to go to court to Italy, in Italy, because it is easier, it's a familiar jurisdiction, and I will win. Sure, okay, be my guest. They go to Italy, they win sometimes. And then what do they do with the beautiful sentence that they got once they come back to Vietnam? Because there is no treaty for the recognition of foreign sentences from Italy in Vietnam. So another possibility is, of course, to go for arbitration. But Vietnam has a pretty low record of recognition of foreign arbitrations, even though it is part of the New York Convention on the Recognition of Foreign Awards, which is just 65%. Now, there are arbitral tribunals, such as the Singapore International Arbitration Center, whose rate of recognition in Vietnam is much higher, which means that the effective enforceability of foreign arbitral awards is lower than 65%. So again, you should be careful where you go for arbitration in this case, or for adjudication in any case. The other matter is that when we talked about investments, the other matter is that divesting can sometimes be brutally complicated. What about remittance of not just dividends, but remittance of your shares? The moment you sell your shares, how do you get your money back? How much will end up in taxes? How much will end up in bank commissions? How much will end up in making sure that you get hold of what you have the right to get? And on top of that, it can be very cumbersome to close businesses in certain jurisdictions. Again, this is a typical issue that we face in Vietnam. We have now been dealing with the representative office of an Italian client in this country that needs to be closed. And it's been almost 12 months since we started the procedures for closing a, allow me to say, stupid representative office. It's not a major company. It's not a listed company on the stock exchange of Saigon. It is just a representative office. Allow me, since I mentioned representative office, just say a few words about investments again, namely the type of structure that you want to set up, which may not be the one that you think it is. I see it in Vietnam and China, where we have these legal entities which are representative offices that do not really exist the way they are defined here in countries like Italy, where you have a permanent establishment, but not really a representative office that you apply for with the relevant authorities. And then again, voting rights, tag-along rights, drag-along rights, minority rights, etc. in companies, they are dealt with differently. Also within Europe, for instance, the Netherlands is a jurisdiction that that attracts a number of companies from Italy because of its flexibility in terms of shareholding rights, etc., voting rights, blah, blah, blah. And then other structures, such as American limited liability companies. They have been quite popular in Europe, and not just in Europe, among young digital entrepreneurs. They say, well, it's easy, you know, I open an LLC in Delaware or Wyoming, it's tax-free, etc. Well, it's not so easy. It is taken lightly, and the US takes these matters very seriously. I'm sure American listeners will know about the CTA, the Corporate Transparency Act, that imposes severe penalties for failure to report a number of compulsory documents. And sadly, many investors do not seek proper legal advice. They go to the wrong consultants, legal advisors. They do things their own without even seeking for advice, and then they hurt themselves badly, even in relatively known and famous jurisdictions for people, for instance, from Europe that invest in the US, which is not as far and as culturally distant as Vietnam or Singapore, for instance. I cannot hear you.
Yes, it's all about the
Right.
fact that some people don't know what they don't know. Unless you go and speak to the expert, you could be walking into a trap. You could be making a mistake that's going to have huge consequences. And I think in the age of Google, where everyone thinks they're an attorney and they can just, kind of figure it out and wing it and invest into business or go into partnerships in foreign lands where they don't completely understand the consequences of their actions, it behooves people to go and check out people like you, people like Domenic, so that they can make sure that they're not going to have a nightmare later on. Go ahead, Domenic.
No, I was just going to say that although both myself and Federico are lawyers, I should say that our role is also to coordinate the relevant information, because often, particularly on these investment packages that we get, there are aspects of it which are beyond our job description. For instance, the tax implications of certain structures need to be washed through by the appropriate person. And questions, for instance, on valuation of businesses where there is a claim for damages, that would need to be dealt with in a professional way by third parties. So although we can give a general structure and direction, and we could input the legal stuff, if you're doing an investment package, you will need other players to come along and add to the game, and often the lawyer is the coordinator of these other experts that come along. I had recently a question to do with litigation of a foreign company that owned UK property, and the question was, if the company liquidated the company and distributed the assets in the liquidation, was there any tax liabilities in the UK for the distribution? And the answer was yes, there is capital gains tax to pay, but I needed to have that confirmation in writing from an expert who would be able to precisely tell me what the tax implications of this particular engagement was. So we are actually coordinators and intermediaries of information from various sectors in order to present to the client a complete picture of the potential consequences of what they're doing.
Got it. A lawyer as a coordinator.
Yeah, absolutely.
You won't know everything. You have to rely on others.
Absolutely not. And any lawyer that tells you that that they can do all this, that, and the other, you should stay clear of. Because it's just not possible. And the potential, liability consequences of trying, to control everything and to know everything are vast.
Exactly. All right, gentlemen. Well, thank you so much for the talk. And I'll leave people with, again, if they want to get in touch with both of you guys individually, Domenic, your website is pinifranco.com. If you're listening instead of watching, it's Pino Franco. I'm sorry, let me start over. It's PINI Franco.com.
Yeah.
And Federico, it's dmtvglobal.com. And of course, International Jurists is where everybody's at. And internationaljurists.com. I put that into Google, of course, website. So make sure you put the S at the end of jurists. So internationaljurists.com. All right, gentlemen. So thank you so much for the talk. We will continue the conversation, and we have so many more things we can talk about when it comes to cross-border. But today we'll stop here. And all right, go ahead, guys.
Wishing you a happy festival break. In this season. So I hope you have a good rest, Mac.
Thank you so
during
much.
This Christmas or festival period of time. And the same to you, Federico, of course.
Thank you very much. Best wishes. I join you in your wishes, Domenic.
Do you have any Christmas trees in Vietnam? Or?
The invisible one. No, seriously, we have a lot of decorations. We do. Thank you.
Okay.
Merry Christmas. Thank you.
Merry Christmas to you.
All right, everyone. Check out lmipodcast.com for this video and many more. All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.